Another Total War game is upon us in just a few months, and there is no new Total War game without its fair share of haters. Now I won't piss off half the fanbase and push away every criticism here, as a lot of it is actually valid, but I've seen my fair share of criticism that just seems rather weak. And so in this video, I thought I'd give you my honest thoughts on Pharaoh thus far, and share my opinions on the criticism of what has been shown off. But before that, I want to make something clear. Part of why I began this channel was to provide my ideas and thoughts on the Total War series, and to perhaps even bring some semblance of change to these games. I do have my fair share of grievances with the way the series has developed over the years after all, but I'm also able to recognize where improvements have been made. And so, with that out of the way, let's look at a bit of criticism I find is based in ignorance, and share some of my own thoughts on Pharaoh as well. A few days ago, a Reddit user posted a screenshot comparing a scene from Total War Pharaoh with Shogun 2. The complaint here was that Pharaoh's UI philosophy, namely that of seemingly infinite icon bloat, is a much worse design than Shogun 2's much more simplistic UX. And you know, I principally agree. I find that the Total Wars that favor immersive design language and simplistic UIs over icons everywhere are superior. But here's the thing. This image and caption completely misrepresents Total War Pharaoh and every modern Total War title. You see, every Total War game since at least Warhammer have offered this type of icon fest. But what's not talked about here is that Creative Assembly has actually made nearly every UI element toggleable. This means that you don't have to watch these icons if you don't want to. In fact, a whole slew of UI elements can be completely turned off and on at a whim, even to the point where you can turn the entirety of the UI off with one simple button click. In this way, even though I agree that Total War's default UI used to be better, when adding context and what's now possible, the entirety of Total War's UI has actually never been better, because it now allows for choices and ease of use far beyond what was ever possible. And so, this post seems like a bit of a cheap shot for me, and could very well have been made for Warhammer 3 instead, even though it would still be wrong for that game too. I also want to discuss the criticism that Pharaoh is just a reskin of a Total War Saga Troy, because I find it to be a bit unfair. For its entire lifetime, Creative Assembly has had as its philosophy to reuse engines with at least one sequel, before moving on to a revamped one. Medieval 2 uses an improved version of the Rome engine, Napoleon is improved from Empire, Attila is improved from Rome 2, and even though Warhammer 2 essentially looks identical to Warhammer 1, Warhammer 3 is certainly an upgrade from the second game. They do still look very similar, and even though I've certainly complained that Total War engines for a while have suffered from weird color, lighting, and saturation design, I haven't seen many others giving the same criticism. When Pharaoh seems to be looking very much like Troy then, I certainly agree this is the case, but it's rather weird to hate on it so much when Pharaoh after all is a de facto direct sequel to Troy. It's from the same studio, it's seemingly a saga type game, and it's releasing directly after CA Sofia's last title. In other words, it makes sense that these games look similar. And listen, I'm a sucker for graphics and I'm the first one to want more. And even though I still hope we'll see a relative upgrade, Troy already looked extremely beautiful. I hope Pharaoh will indeed look a bit better, but there's no massive shame in it sporting the same vibe or looking kinda the same. Again, this is nothing new, and it's on the contrary a Total War tradition, despite, as is obvious, the jump from Rome to Medieval 2 even on the same engine was a uniquely big update. What I do agree on though is that the UI elements and various design choices do indeed look nearly identical to those in Troy. And if you didn't like that vibe, which I happen to love, then I understand this can be a bit of a letdown. But once again, I would remind you that Rome and Medieval 2 share the exact same design language. So did both Empire and Napoleon, and so did Warhammer 1, 2, and even 3. Once more then, history repeats itself for better or worse. But don't hate uniquely on Pharaoh for doing this when it's been a staple of the series for 20 years. What I will say though is that I wish the UI saw a bit more of a change. Not in the windows itself, which seemingly sport amazing Egyptian themes, but in the general vibe. Troy did have a certain clean, punk aesthetic, admittedly choosing not to go for an ancient look, but more of a sleek, dark design. Pharaoh seems to go for the same, and even though I certainly don't hate it, I would probably prefer if the rest of the UI theme matched those of the gorgeous windows here, making everything look distinctly ancient and unique. I would have also really liked it if Pharaoh used Warhammer 3's engine rather than Troy's, because even though Troy still looks good, Warhammer 3 just looks better, with even more competent use of temporal anti-aliasing and color schemes. For now, Pharaoh looks just a bit more like Troy on the battle maps than I would have liked, but I certainly don't hate it, and it remains to be seen just how much better it can all look when the game releases in October. What I do find to be concerning though, and this is not unique to Pharaoh at all, but something I really wish to see make a return in Total War, is the actual utilization of the campaign map. Again, we do not have all the facts here, and we currently know very little of how Pharaoh's campaign will play in detail. But from what we saw, the map looked very similar to Troy, which shares the same design philosophy as Total War games since Napoleon, meaning that there is no creating your own forts or watchtowers. It might sound like a minor thing, and I do think a system of raceable entities could be wildly expanded upon, but I really do believe having the ability to ever so slightly alter and personify the map adds a lot of that good old feeling of roleplay. Especially for a more focused map, being able to create choke points and defensive positions other than just utilizing army stances is vital, and I truly miss this feature, which is why it really does feel so good to play titles like Rome Remastered and Medieval 2 even today. The same goes for small villages outside of larger cities. Massive maps crave action and life, and I think it is a massive disservice to such a seemingly beautiful and large map like this one to not feature villages dotting the map. I'm talking here about the kind of smaller settlements we found in Empire and Napoleon, a one resource type village or town that improved the situation of the entire province. These systems give Total War campaigns that much more granularity, and a type of granularity they really crave, and if I'm not mistaken, it's really sad to see that they have yet to make a return all these years later. Because in my opinion, the province system CA implemented with Rome 2, and which still lingers on, has been to the series' detriment, and I really want a major shakeup here. This is an aspect that kind of parallels what CA is seemingly doing on the battle map level. According to the developers, Pharaoh is bringing back unit formations in the form of unit stances, giving each unit various stances to combat and prepare for different combat situations. This is something we've seen in previous Total Wars as well, but to my knowledge, the last Total War to truly do it correctly was Attila back in 2015. I've longed for this granularity in unit management ever since. I felt it was a shame it wasn't in Troy, which to me made those battles more boring because of it, and so I'm just really glad that it's back. Again, I really just wish they would give the campaign map the same treatment by bringing back more options to define it ourselves. The fact that Pharaoh only offers 8 different factions on launch is another point of contention, and frankly I don't know if I have a clear stance here. 8 factions is not necessarily little. I know I personally tend to rotate between the same 5 or so, but options are of course always welcome, and if I had to choose between more or less, I'd always choose more. We now already know that Pharaoh will release a few faction packs actually, and so more experiences are on the way. But whether 8 is enough, I really think it depends on the quality and distinctness of what's here. First of all, I do expect the Egyptian, Canaanite, and Hittite cultures to be different from each other, and to offer unique mechanics based on each one. And further, since we have 4 and 2 factions respectively per these cultures, totaling 8, I certainly hope each leader carries further unique mechanics to separate them even more from each other. Knowing how Troy turned out, I have no doubt this is the case, but whereas Troy mostly if not only featured characters worshipping the same pantheon of gods, Pharaoh has an opportunity here to create even more uniqueness, because the Egyptian pantheon was not the same as the Hittite one. In this way then, I really think Pharaoh can come to offer more than Troy ever did, but this does of course remain to be seen. And lastly, let's talk about the historical aspect here. I've seen so many people claim that Pharaoh is just another fantasy title or whatever, and that's just straight up wrong. Of course not everything will be historically accurate, the team at CA Sofia instead opting for the most historically authentic game they can make, but there will be no magic here, no gods and no mythological creatures. Again, Pharaoh is not Troy, and it certainly isn't Warhammer. I don't know how this game will end up, but based on what has been said and shown, there is no reason to state that this is going to be a fantasy-like title, and to dismiss it outright on the basis of not liking Troy. The only way I can see this line of thought ring even remotely true is in the way the campaign system of prosperity and collapse is set up. But this system more or less mimics the climate change system in Attila, and I don't believe anyone ever called Attila a fantasy-inspired title. Certain mechanics are here to exaggerate or to bring a distinct feeling after all, and to create a vibe that sets a game apart from the rest. I for one like this a lot, and I hope Pharaoh achieves its goal here, especially because unlike Attila, the collapse in Pharaoh can actually be turned around back into prosperity if you play your cards right. It really seems like CA Sofia is intent on making the best historically authentic game they can, and even though I definitely have my share of criticism as laid out in this video, I'm also excited to see what's there, and to learn even more about how this campaign plays out. If you have any thoughts on this topic, or if there's something I forgot to discuss, let me know in the comments. And as always, make sure to leave a like, a comment, and sub to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!